A poor cowboy asked for her hand, but her father tested his heart before giving his blessing. The poorest man in Coulter Bend walked up to the richest ranch porch in the valley with his hat in his hands and no promise in his pocket. Jacob Wren had faced cold nights, empty plates, and horses mean enough to bite a man just for breathing near them. He had crossed swollen creeks with cattle pushing behind him. He had slept under a wagon when rain came through the canvas like thrown needles. He had worked since he was 12 and never once asked life to be gentle. But standing before the wide front steps of the Bellamy Ranch, he felt his courage slipping like loose sand. The house sat above the valley with clean white porch rails, a stone chimney, and windows that caught the morning sun. Beyond it, long pastures rolled toward the Montana hills, brown with October grass and silver where frost still held in the shade. Every fence post stood straight. Every barn board looked paid for. Every acre seemed to remind Jacob that he had almost nothing. He owned one sorrel horse, one saddle with a cracked stirrup, 2 shirts good enough for Sunday if the collar was turned right, and $11 folded inside his coat. He had not come to ask for work. He had come to ask for Eliza Bellamy. That was the trouble. Eliza was not the kind of girl men forgot after meeting her. She was 20, with calm brown eyes and dark hair she pinned at the back of her neck when she worked. She did not flutter when men spoke to her. She did not act helpless when a gate stuck or a horse pulled wrong. She had a way of looking at people that made them stand a little straighter, as if she could see the honest part first and the foolish part after. Jacob had first seen her in June beside the dry creek, crossing east of town. A wagon wheel had sunk into the mud after a late storm, and the driver, an old widow named Mrs. Hanley, was near tears trying to free it. Jacob had been riding fence for the Bar T outfit and was already late getting back. He could have passed with a nod. Plenty of men would have. Eliza was there before him, her skirt hemmed dark with mud, both hands braced on the wagon side. "Push when I say," she told Mrs. Hanley, calm as a preacher before Sunday hymns. Jacob had swung down from his horse without asking who she was. "I can help," he said. Eliza looked at his worn coat, his dusty boots, then his face. "Then put your shoulder there and don't quit halfway." That was the first thing she ever said to him. He did not quit halfway. Together they freed the wagon, though the mud took one of Jacob's boots and nearly kept it. Mrs. Hanley laughed after she was safe, and Eliza laughed too, not loud, but warm enough to stay with him all day. Before she climbed into her own buggy, she handed him the boot he had lost. "You work for the Bar T?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Then you are a long way from your fence line." "So are you." She smiled at that. "I go where help is needed." He should have forgotten her. A hired cowhand had no business remembering a rancher's daughter, but memory does not ask permission. By July, every ride near the Bellamy pasture felt dangerous. By August, he knew which road Eliza took into town on Saturdays. By September, he hated himself a little for hoping to see her and felt grateful every time he did. She did not make it easy on him. Once at the mercantile, she found him counting coins for coffee and flour, and he stepped aside quickly, ashamed for no reason he could name. She noticed. "You count money like it is going to run away," she said. "It usually does." She looked at the flour sack in his hand. "You eating enough out at Bar T?" He gave a small smile, enough to keep from blowing over. Her face changed then, not pity. Jacob would have walked out if he had seen pity. It was something softer and more careful. "A man should not have to joke about hunger," she said. He had no answer. 2 weeks later, when he found a cloth-wrapped parcel hanging from his saddle horn outside the livery, there were biscuits inside, still warm, and a folded note. No man should ride on an empty stomach. No name was signed, none was needed. He kept that note under the lining of his small wooden trunk. By October, the whole valley knew what Jacob was trying not to say. Men at the livery smirked when Eliza's buggy passed. The bar T foreman warned him twice not to reach above his station. Even Jacob's closest friend, Amos Pike, told him plain, "Bellamy will skin you with his eyes before you finish the first sentence." Jacob had believed him. Silas Bellamy was not cruel, but he was not soft either. He had built his ranch from wild grass and debt, and every man in Coulter Bend knew he could judge cattle, weather, and character faster than most men could read a price board. He had buried one son to fever, raised one daughter like she was stronger than glass, and guarded his home with the quiet force of a man who had already lost enough. Jacob reached the porch and stopped. Inside, something moved. A chair leg scraped. A woman's voice, likely Mrs. Bellamy, spoke low from the kitchen. Somewhere behind the barn, a horse stamped against the cold. Jacob lifted his hand to knock, then lowered it. He thought of his $11. He thought of Eliza's biscuits. He thought of the way she had said, "Don't quit halfway." So he knocked. The door opened after a moment, and Silas Bellamy filled the frame. He was a tall man with silver at his temples, a thick gray mustache, and eyes the color of Winter Creek water. He looked at Jacob's hat, then his boots, then his face. "Morning," Silas said. Jacob swallowed. "Morning, sir." Silas waited. Jacob had practiced words for 3 nights in the bunkhouse. Fine words, respectful words, words that might make him sound like more than a poor hand with a foolish hope, but every one of them scattered the moment Silas Bellamy looked at him. So Jacob told the truth. "Mr. Bellamy, I came to ask permission to court your daughter." The house went still. Behind Silas, Jacob saw Mrs. Bellamy in the hallway with a dish towel in her hands. Her eyes flicked toward the stairs, where the hem of a blue dress disappeared just out of sight. Eliza was listening. Silas did not turn around. He stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him, leaving Jacob outside with him in the cold morning light. "You know what you are asking," Silas said. "Yes, sir." "You have land?" "No, sir." "Cattle?" "No, sir." "Money saved?" Jacob's fingers tightened around his hat brim. $11. Silas's face did not change, but the silence after that answer felt heavier than a loaded wagon. Jacob lifted his chin. "I know I am poor. I know she has had better offers and will have more. I know a man like me does not come to a porch like this expecting easy favor." His voice shook once, but he held it steady. "But I would never treat her carelessly. I would work until my hands split before I let her go hungry. I would speak plain to her. I would stand by her. And if all I have today is my name, then I will spend my life making sure it is worth something." For the first time, Silas Bellamy looked away. Not far, just toward the lower pasture, where the frost was beginning to melt from the grass. When he looked back, something in his eyes had changed, though Jacob could not tell if it was mercy or warning. "My daughter does not need a rich man," Silas said quietly. "She needs a good one." Jacob's breath caught. But Silas raised one hand before hope could rise too high. "And I do not know yet if you are that man." The porch boards creaked under the older man's boots as he stepped closer. "There is a place north of here," Silas said. "Widow Carter's spread. Her husband died last spring. Her fence is down, her hay is short, and winter will take half her stock if somebody does not set things right. She cannot pay wages. She can barely keep feed in the barn." Jacob listened, his heart beating hard. "You will go there before sundown," Silas said. "You will stay through the winter. You will fix what needs fixing, teach her younger boys what their father did not live long enough to teach, and bring that herd through spring if you can." Jacob's mouth went dry. October wind moved across the porch. Somewhere behind the closed door, A floorboard gave the smallest sound. Silas held his gaze. "There is no promise at the end of it," he said. "No bargain, no wedding word, no reward. You may come back in March and hear me say no." Jacob thought of Eliza standing behind that door. He thought of the note in his trunk. He thought of every cold morning he had ever survived because quitting had never fed anyone. Then he put his hat back on. "Yes, sir," he said. Eliza Bellamy narrowed his eyes. "You answer fast." Jacob looked toward the hills, where the north road ran pale beneath the morning sun. "If a thing is right," he said, "waiting does not make it righter." For a long moment, Silas said nothing. Then the door opened behind him. Eliza stood there, one hand on the frame, her face pale but steady. She did not smile. She did not cry. She only looked at Jacob as if something had been placed between them that both of them must now carry. "Jacob," she said softly. Silas turned just enough to see her, but he did not stop her. Eliza stepped onto the porch and held something out. It was a pair of wool gloves, mended at the thumb. "For the north road," she said. Jacob took them carefully, like they were worth more than anything he owned. Their fingers touched for half a breath. "Come back when the creek breaks," she whispered. Jacob wanted to promise. He wanted to say he would return with spring grass under his horse and an answer waiting. But Eliza Bellamy had given him no promise, and Jacob would not steal one with his mouth. So he only nodded. "I will do my best," he said. Eliza's eyes softened. "That is why I gave them to you." Jacob walked down the porch steps with the gloves in his hand and $11 in his coat. Behind him, the Bellamy door closed. Ahead of him, the north road stretched toward a hard winter, a widow's broken ranch, and a test that might cost him everything. And from the upstairs window, Eliza watched him ride away until the dust swallowed him whole. By sundown, Jacob Wren was riding north with Eliza Bellamy's wool gloves tucked inside his coat. He did not wear them yet. The day was cold enough for gloves, and the wind had teeth, but he kept them close to his chest as if wearing them too soon might take some meaning from them. Every few miles, his hand moved to the inside of his coat, just to feel that they were still there. The road north of Coulter Bend did not look like a road for long. It became 2 wagon ruts through pale grass, then one hard trail cut across open range, then a thin mark between low hills where the wind had pushed dust into every hollow. Jacob had been that way once before with the Bar T crew. He remembered the land as mean and lonely, the kind that made a man speak less because there was too much sky listening. Widow Carter's place sat in a shallow bowl of land with rocky ridges on 3 sides and a creek that ran thin even after rain. The house leaned a little east, as if tired of standing against weather. The barn roof had missing shakes. One corral gate hung crooked. The fence line on the north side looked like it had given up after the first bad storm and nobody had found strength to argue with it. A lantern burned in the kitchen window. Jacob stopped at the gate and looked at it. He had expected hard work. He had expected poverty. He had not expected the quiet sorrow that seemed to sit over the whole place like smoke after a fire. A boy stepped out of the barn with a pitchfork in his hands. He could not have been more than 14, tall for his age but too thin at the wrists. His hair was light brown and stuck out from under his cap. When he saw Jacob, he lifted the pitchfork a little, not threatening exactly, but frightened enough to pretend he was. "Who are you?" the boy called. "Jacob Wren. Mr. Bellamy sent me." The boy did not lower the pitchfork. "For what?" "To help." The kitchen door opened before the boy could answer. A woman stood there with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She was not old, but grief had aged her face in the way winter ages a fence. Her eyes went from Jacob to the horse, then to the saddle, then back to his face. "You the hand Silas spoke of?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "You know there is no money here." I was told. You know the work is ugly. I was told that too. The younger boy came out behind her then, maybe 11, with red hands and a suspicious stare. He had a smear of flour on his sleeve, and Jacob guessed he had been helping where a child should not have to. The widow looked at Jacob for a long moment. Then put your horse in the shed, she said. Supper is thin, but it is hot. That was his welcome. Her name was Martha Carter. Her older son was Eli. The younger one was Noah. Her husband, Daniel, had been thrown from a horse the previous April while moving cattle down from the ridge pasture. He had lived 2 days after it, long enough to tell Eli where the winter feed was stored, and Noah where he had hidden the good bridle, but not long enough to teach either boy what to do with a ranch that had always run on his hands. Jacob learned that much over bowls of watery bean stew. Nobody said the dead man's name loudly. It came out low, as if the house might break if it heard. Eli watched Jacob across the table the entire meal. You fixing to tell us what we've done wrong? The boy asked at last. Martha closed her eyes. Eli. Jacob set his spoon down. No, he said. I figure I'll learn what needs doing first. Eli's mouth tightened. Men already came and looked. Mr. Dobbs from town said Mama ought to sell before winter makes the place worthless. Mr. Dobbs owned cattle. No. Then I would not let him judge yours. For the first time, Noah smiled into his bowl. Martha looked down quickly, but Jacob saw her hand tremble around the spoon. After supper, she showed him the small room behind the pantry where he could sleep. It had a narrow cot, one quilt, and a window that rattled every time wind moved along the wall. It is not much, she said. Jacob thought of sleeping under wagons, in barns, and once inside a freight shed with 3 strangers and a dog that snored louder than a drunk. It is more than enough. She seemed unsure what to do with that answer. Before she left, she paused with her hand on the door. Eliza Bellamy said you were trustworthy. Jacob looked up. That is kind of him. He did not say it kindly, Martha said, but I know what he meant. Then she left him alone. Jacob sat on the cot in the small cold room and pulled Eliza's gloves from his coat. The mending on the thumb was neat, careful, done by a patient hand. He turned them over slowly. He had no letter from her, no promise, no ribbon, no word that would stand before her father, just gloves for the North Road and one whispered command. Come back when the creek breaks. He laid the gloves under his folded coat and slept with one hand near them. The next morning showed him the truth of the Carter place. It was worse than Silas had said. The haystack was lower than it should have been by half. The cattle were scattered too wide, wasting strength searching poor ground. The water trough near the lower pen leaked. A broken hinge on the feed shed had let snowmelt damage 2 sacks of grain. The north fence was down in 3 places, and the ridge pasture gate had been tied shut with rope because nobody had found the right pin. Nothing was ruined yet. That almost made it harder. A place fully ruined could be walked away from. A place almost ruined begged a man to save it. Jacob stood in the yard with Eli and Noah beside him. The boys watched his face like they were waiting for him to confirm their worst fear. He did not. We start with the trough, Jacob said. Eli blinked, not the fence. Cattle can stand behind a poor fence for one more morning. They cannot drink from an empty trough. Noah nodded as if this made perfect sense, though it clearly had not occurred to him before. By noon, Jacob had the trough patched. By evening, he had Noah carrying nails, Eli cutting boards, and the feed shed door swinging proper for the first time in months. He did not speak harshly. He did not call them boys in the belittling way men sometimes did. He gave instructions plain and expected them to listen. When Eli made a mistake, Jacob corrected it. When Eli made the same mistake twice, Jacob showed him again. When Eli threw the hammer down and snapped, "I ain't my pa," Jacob did not answer right away. The yard fell quiet. Even the wind seemed to move around them. Jacob crouched, picked up the hammer and held it out. "No," he said, "you are not." Eli's eyes flashed with hurt. Jacob kept his voice steady. "And nobody has the right to ask you to become him by winter." The boy stared at him. "You are 14, Jacob said. "That is old enough to learn. It is not old enough to carry a dead man's whole life on your back." Eli looked away fast, but not before Jacob saw the tears. Noah stood frozen by the feed shed, a nail pouch hanging from one small hand. Jacob set the hammer on the workbench. "We will learn one thing at a time," he said. "Today hinges, tomorrow fence, after that weather. That is how ranches are kept, not by becoming someone else, by learning what needs doing next." Eli wiped his nose with his sleeve and nodded once. That evening, Martha put an extra biscuit on Jacob's plate. It was small and hard at the edge, and she acted as if she had done nothing special. Jacob did not mention it. But after supper, when he stepped outside to check the sky, he found Eli waiting by the porch rail. "You really think the herd can make winter?" the boy asked. Jacob looked toward the dark shapes of cattle gathered low against the wind. "If we get them tight, feed smart, and fix the ridge fence before hard snow," he said, "yes." Eli swallowed. "And if we do?" Jacob did not lie. "Then spring will come empty." The boy stared into the dark. From inside the house came the sound of Martha washing dishes and Noah humming under his breath, too young to understand fully and old enough to be afraid. Eli's voice dropped. "Mr. Dobbs said he would buy the land, said Mama would be foolish not to take it." Jacob turned his head. "When did he say that?" "This morning, before you came." A slow unease moved through Jacob. "What else did he say?" Eli looked toward the kitchen window, making sure his mother could not hear. "He said help from Bellamy would not last, said poor men always leave when the cold gets mean." The words struck harder than Jacob expected. Poor men always leave. Jacob looked down at his hands. They were cracked already from one day's work. Then he reached inside his coat and pulled on Eliza's gloves for the first time. They fit a little tight across the knuckles, but they were warm. He looked back at the broken yard, the leaning barn, the low hay, the two boys trying not to be scared, and the widow pretending she still had choices. "I am not leaving," Jacob said. Eli studied him, as if trying to decide whether a man's words could be trusted before winter had tested them. Far off somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote cried. The first snow began before dawn. The first snow did not fall kindly. It came sideways before the sun had fully risen, thin and sharp, sweeping over the Carter place like the sky had emptied a sack of white dust across the hills. By breakfast, the yard was pale. By noon, the broken north fence had disappeared beneath a crawling sheet of cold. The cattle had moved low toward the creek bottom, restless and uneasy, their dark backs showing through the storm like stones in moving water. Jacob Wren stood at the kitchen window with a biscuit in one hand and his eyes on the herd. Martha Carter watched him from the stove. "You are thinking instead of eating," she said. Jacob looked down at the biscuit as if surprised to find it there. "Yes, ma'am." That never helped a man stay upright. He took a bite to please her, though his mind had already gone to the fence line. A storm this early did not always stay, but it told a man what winter meant to do. If the north break was not mended quickly, the cattle would drift beyond the ridge and waste strength finding poor grass. If they scattered in weather, rounding them back would cost more than time. It could cost the spring. Eli came in with snow on his shoulders, winds worse by the barn. Noah followed him, carrying 2 pieces of firewood nearly as big as his arms. The red cow kicked the lower rail again. "She hungry?" Eli said. "They all are," Martha answered quietly. Nobody spoke for a moment after that. Hunger had a way of entering a room before winter did. It sat at the table, leaned near the stove, and waited to see who would look at it first. Jacob finished the biscuit and set his cup down. Eli saddled the bay mare. Noah, gather wire from the shed, the straight pieces only. Mrs. Carter, if you have any old feed sacks, I can use them to wrap the tools. Martha turned from the stove. "You are going to the north fence in this?" "Yes, ma'am." "It can wait until the snow quits." "No," Jacob said, then softened his voice. "Begging your pardon, it cannot." Eli was already moving toward the door, but Martha stayed still. Her face showed the strain of a woman who had spent months watching men decide things over her land, her animals, and her future. Jacob saw it and stopped reaching for his coat. "This is your place," he said. "I will not order inside it." Martha looked at him, startled by the respect in that sentence. Jacob pointed through the window toward the white hillside. "But if that fence stays open, the herd will drift north. If they drift, we spend feed and strength getting them back. If they weaken before December, we will spend the rest of winter losing what could have been saved today." Martha's hand tightened around the edge of the stove. "How many hours?" she asked. "Most of the day." "In this wind?" "Yes." Her eyes moved to Eli, then Noah. "My boys go." "Eli comes with me," Jacob said. "Noah stays near the barn and watches the lower pen. That is important work." Noah straightened a little at that. Martha looked back to Jacob. "Bring my son home before dark." It was not a request. Jacob nodded. "I will." The north fence was 1.5 miles from the house, but in that storm it felt like 10. The bay mare did not want the ridge. Jacob Sorrel hated the wind and showed it with every sideways step. Eli rode with his jaw tight and his shoulders hunched, trying hard not to look young. Snow gathered on his cap and melted down his neck. They found the first break where the land dipped before rising toward Carter Ridge. 3 posts had leaned loose in the soft ground. 2 rails were split. Wire hung slack beneath frost. Beyond it, hoof tracks already crossed into the open north range. Jacob dismounted. Eli looked at the tracks and cursed under his breath. "Did they get far?" he asked. "Not yet." "How do you know?" Jacob pointed to the snow. "Fresh tracks, but not deep. They crossed slow. They are grazing just over the rise." Eli stared at the marks, trying to read what Jacob had read in a breath. "My pa could do that," he said. Jacob pulled the feed sacks from behind his saddle and laid the tools on them. "Then he taught you more than you think." "He didn't teach me enough. He did not get the time." The boy said nothing. They worked in cutting wind, driving posts with hands that numbed inside gloves. Jacob wore Eliza's mended pair and was grateful for every stitch. Eli's fingers stiffened fast, but he did not complain. Once, when the hammer glanced and struck his thumb, he turned away with his teeth clenched and made no sound. Jacob saw it anyway. "Warm your hand under your arm," he said. "I'm fine." "You are not. Warm it." Eli glared at him, then obeyed. Jacob kept working while the boy stood with his injured hand tucked tight under his coat. For a while, only the wind spoke. Then Eli's voice came low. "Mr. Wren." "Jacob is fine." "Jacob," the boy swallowed the name like it felt strange. "If Mama sells, where do we go?" Jacob pushed wire through a staple and pulled it tight. "Has she said she will?" "No, but I heard her crying last week. She thought we were asleep." Jacob kept his eyes on the fence. "My pa promised her this place would stand," Eli said. "He said Carter land would belong to Carter boys." That sounds like a promise a father would make. It is a promise I cannot keep. Jacob drove the staple with 3 steady strikes, not alone. Eli looked at him. That is the part men forget, Jacob said. They think keeping a promise means carrying the whole weight without bending. Sometimes it means letting another hand under the load long enough to stand again. Eli turned away, blinking hard against more than snow. By late afternoon, the first break held. The second was worse. A cottonwood limb had fallen across the wire, pulling half the line down with it. Jacob knew as soon as he saw it that darkness would catch them before they finished. Eli knew too. Ma said before dark, the boy said. We have a little time. The cattle will push through here. Yes. Eli wiped snow from his face. Then we fix it. They cut the fallen limb with a dull saw that fought them at every pull. They braced one new post with stones because the frozen ground would not take it deep. Jacob showed Eli how to twist 2 lengths of broken wire together with the handle of a hammer. The boy's hands shook from cold, but his eyes stayed sharp. When the last rail was set, the sky had turned iron gray and the light was nearly gone. Then they heard the bell. Not a church bell, not a supper bell. The small brass bell from the Carter porch, rung hard and fast. Eli's face drained. Mama! Jacob was already reaching for the horses. They rode back through thickening snow with the wind at their backs, fast as the trail allowed. Halfway down the slope, Jacob saw movement near the lower pen. Dark shapes pressed against the gate. Cattle bunched wrong. A broken latch swung loose. Noah stood on the wrong side of the rail, waving both arms, trying to turn them before they pushed into the yard. The red cow lunged against the gate. Noah slipped. Eli shouted his brother's name. Jacob drove his sorrel forward. He did not think of Eliza Bellamy. He did not think of Eliza waiting by a warm ranch window. He did not think of tests, blessings, or spring. There was only a small boy in snow, a loose gate, and a herd scared enough to crush what stood before it. Jacob swung down before his horse fully stopped. His boots hit ice and nearly went out from under him. He caught the top rail, shoved Noah backward through the gap, and threw his own shoulder into the gate as the first cow hit it. Pain burst through his side. The gate held for one breath, then another. Eli, Jacob shouted, chain. Eli ran, slipping, crying, fighting the snow with every step. Martha was on the porch, ringing the bell with one hand and covering her mouth with the other. Noah lay in the snow behind Jacob, coughing but alive. The red cow pushed again. The gate slammed into Jacob's ribs. His breath left him, but his hands stayed locked. Eli reached the chain and dragged it around the post. Pull it tight, Jacob shouted. I am trying. Now, Eli. With a sound that was half sob and half growl, Eli pulled the chain through, hooked it hard, and dropped against the post. The gate stopped moving. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Noah began to cry. Martha ran from the porch, gathered him into her arms, and held him so tight he gasped. Eli stood beside the chained gate, shaking from cold and terror, staring at Jacob as if seeing him for the first time. Jacob stepped back, one hand pressed to his ribs. You did good, he said to Eli. The boy's mouth trembled. You could have been killed. Jacob looked at Noah in his mother's arms, then at the gate, then at the darkening hills. But I was. That night, after the boys were asleep and the storm still walked around the walls, Martha Carter stood in the kitchen doorway while Jacob sat near the stove with his ribs wrapped in cloth. You were sent here to fix fences, she said. Jacob looked up. Martha's eyes shone in the lantern light. But today you held my house together. He did not know what to say, so he said nothing. She crossed the room and placed a small tin box on the table. My husband kept papers in here, she said. Land notes, old receipts, things I never understood. Mr. Dobbs wants this ranch too badly, and I have begun to wonder why. Jacob looked at the box. The latch was rusted, but the lock had been forced once before. Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. I think someone has already been inside it. Jacob's bruised side throbbed as he leaned closer. And beneath the lid, folded under old tax papers, lay a deed with one corner torn clean away. The torn deed lay on the Carter kitchen table like a quiet accusation. Jacob Wren stared at it while the lantern flame trembled in the draft. Outside, the storm pressed snow against the windows and made the old house creak in its bones. Inside, the room felt too still. Martha Carter stood with her shawl held tight at her throat. Her eyes stayed on the missing corner of the paper, as if that small torn place had opened a hole beneath her whole life. Jacob reached for the deed, then stopped. May I? He asked. Martha nodded. He lifted it carefully. The paper was older than he expected, yellowed at the folds, soft from years of being opened and closed. Daniel Carter's name was written clear enough, and so was Martha's. The land description ran in narrow lines near the bottom, legal words that Jacob could read but not fully trust himself to understand. Then came the torn corner. The missing piece had taken part of a boundary mark, and what looked like the beginning of another name. Jacob turned the deed toward the lantern. This corner did not tear from age, he said. Martha swallowed. How can you tell? Paper tears crooked when it gives way on its own. He touched the edge lightly. This was pulled. Martha sat down slowly. For a moment, she looked less like a mother holding a ranch together, and more like a woman who had been walking in the dark too long. Daniel kept that box under our bed, she said. After he died, I opened it twice, once for the undertaker's bill, once when Mr. Dobbs came asking about the land note. Jacob's eyes lifted. Dobbs handled your papers. He said a widow ought not face county records alone. Her mouth tightened with shame. I was tired. The boys were watching me every minute, and the house was full of people telling me what I should do. He sat right there and told me he would help. Jacob looked at the chair she pointed to. He could almost see it. A grieving woman, 2 frightened sons, a polished town man with a soft voice and clean cuffs, offering help with one hand and reaching for the lockbox with the other. What did he want? Jacob asked. He said there was an old claim line running along the North Ridge. Said Daniel may have misunderstood how much land he owned. Said selling early would spare me court trouble. Jacob's fingers curled around the edge of the deed. The North Ridge, he said. Martha nodded. Where you fixed fence today? The room seemed to grow colder. Jacob thought of Dobbs telling Eli poor men always leave when the cold gets mean. He thought of the broken fence on the north side, the cattle drifting toward open range, the missing deed corner, and the ranch that a town man wanted too badly. Some troubles were born from weather, some were made by men. This one had fingerprints. Martha lowered her voice. Do you think he means to take it? Jacob set the paper down. I think he means for you to believe you have already lost it. Her face changed then, not relief, not yet, but something firmer than fear moved through her eyes. What do we do? Jacob looked toward the hall where Eli and Noah slept. He thought of Eliza Bellamy saying there would be no promise at the end. He had come north to prove whether he was a good man. But here, in this kitchen, with a widow's deed torn and 2 boys sleeping under a roof that might be stolen from them, the test no longer belonged to Silas. It belonged to Jacob. We keep this quiet, he said. Tomorrow I ride to town and ask the county clerk about the original record. Martha shook her head. Dobbs has friends in town. Then I will ask carefully. He will hear. Maybe, Jacob's ribs ached as he leaned back in the chair. But if he tore this, he already believes you are alone. Let him keep believing it for one more day. Martha looked at him a long time. You talk like a man older than you are. I have been poor long enough to learn when someone is trying to make fear do their work for them. That sentence stayed in the room after he said it. Martha folded the deed and put it back in the tin box, but she did not lock it. The lock no longer meant much. She carried the box to the pantry, moved 2 flour sacks and tucked it behind them. When she returned, Jacob was still sitting by the table, one hand pressed against his side. You should rest, she said. So should you. I have not rested since April. Her voice did not break, but Jacob heard the crack beneath it. He stood, slower than he wanted, and reached for his coat. Tomorrow will need us both standing. Martha gave a tired nod and turned down the lamp. In the small room behind the pantry, Jacob did not sleep quickly. Pain moved through his ribs every time he breathed too deeply. The storm worried at the window. Somewhere in the dark, a loose board tapped against the side of the house in the same uneven rhythm. He pulled Eliza's gloves from beneath his coat and held them in both hands. The mended thumb had darkened from snow and work. A small thread had pulled loose at the edge. He rubbed it with his finger, thinking of her standing on the Bellamy porch, not making promises her father had not given, but giving him warmth for the road anyway. He wondered what Silas would say if he could see the Carter place now. He wondered whether Eliza was looking north that night, seeing the storm over the hills and wondering if he was safe. He wanted to write to her, but what could he say? Dear Eliza, the winter has started early. My ribs are bruised, the fence nearly failed, and I think a man in town may be trying to steal a widow's ranch. He almost smiled despite the pain. Then his smile faded. Because if Dobbs was the sort of man Jacob suspected, the next move would not be quiet. Morning came gray and hard. The snow had stopped, but the world outside was covered in a thin crust of white that broke under every boot step. Jacob woke before dawn and found Eli already in the barn, feeding the horses with stiff, careful movements. The boy glanced at Jacob's wrapped ribs. You riding today? To town. Eli's hand paused over the feed bucket, because of the papers. Jacob looked at him. Eli's face reddened. I heard some, not all. Jacob did not scold him. He remembered Eliza listening behind a door. Fear made listeners of people who were not invited into hard conversations. Yes, Jacob said, because of the papers. Eli set the bucket down. I'm coming. No. It's my land too. That is why you are staying. The boy's eyes flashed. That makes no sense. Jacob stepped closer. If Dobbs has a reason to trouble your mother while I am gone, she needs you here. Noah needs you here. The stock needs you here. A man does not prove himself by running toward the loudest danger. Sometimes he proves it by staying where he is needed. Eli looked away, breathing hard through his nose. Jacob softened his voice. You want to help? Yes. Then check the lower gate twice. Keep Noah out of the pens. If anyone rides in while I am gone, you say your mother is resting and you do not answer questions. What if it's Dobbs? Especially then. Eli's jaw tightened, but he nodded. By 7, Jacob was riding toward Coulter Bend with his coat buttoned high, the cold biting through him, and a copy of the deed tucked inside his shirt. Martha had traced what she could on a separate paper so the original could stay hidden. The north road was slick where snow had melted and frozen again. His sorrel moved carefully, ears twitching toward every sound. Coulter Bend looked peaceful when he reached it near midday. Smoke rose from chimneys. Wagons stood outside the mercantile. A dog slept under the livery awning as if no trouble had ever entered the town. Jacob knew better. Trouble often wore a clean coat. He tied his horse behind the county office instead of out front. Inside, the building smelled of dust, ink, and coal smoke. The clerk, Mr. Abel Finch, was a narrow man with round spectacles and a habit of blinking before he spoke. Jacob removed his hat. "I need to see the land record for the Carter place north of town." Mr. Finch looked up too quickly. "The Carter place?" "Yes, sir." "What business is it of yours?" "I am helping Mrs. Carter through winter." The clerk's eyes moved toward the window, then back to Jacob. "Those records are not open for casual looking." Jacob kept his voice polite. "I was told county land records were public." "They are, in proper circumstances." "These are proper." Mr. Finch swallowed. That was when Jacob understood. The man was afraid. Not guilty, maybe, but afraid. Jacob leaned one hand on the counter, ignoring the pain in his side. "Mr. Finch, I am not asking you to take sides. I am asking you to show me what is written where all men are allowed to read." The clerk looked toward the back room. For one long moment, Jacob thought he would refuse. Then Finch stood, walked to a shelf, and pulled down a heavy brown ledger. His hands shook as he opened it. "Carter Daniel," he muttered. "Filed 1876. Boundary correction filed 1879. Jacob's eyes sharpened. Boundary correction. Finch froze. Before he could answer, the office door opened behind them. A warm, smooth voice filled the room. "Well now," said Mr. Dobbs, "isn't this a surprise?" Jacob turned. Alvin Dobbs stood inside the doorway in a fine dark coat, polished boots, and a smile that did not reach his eyes. Behind him, through the office window, Jacob saw Eliza Bellamy's wagon parked across the street. And sitting beside it, holding the reins with both hands, was Eliza. Jacob Wren had not expected to see Eliza Bellamy in town. For one small, dangerous moment, the sight of her almost made him forget Alvin Dobbs standing in the county office doorway. She sat on the wagon bench across the street with her brown hair tucked beneath a dark bonnet, her shoulders straight under a blue wool shawl. The cold had colored her cheeks, but her eyes were fixed on the county office window. On him. Then Dobbs stepped farther into the room, and the moment broke. "Well," Dobbs said, removing one glove finger by finger, a Bar T cowhand studying land records. "Coulter Bend does grow more educated by the season." Mr. Finch closed the ledger halfway. Jacob noticed. Dobbs noticed him noticing. "I asked for the Carter record," Jacob said evenly. "Mr. Finch was showing it to me." "Was he?" Dobbs looked at the clerk with soft disappointment. "That seems a heavy matter for a hired hand." Finch's face went pale behind his spectacles. Jacob kept one hand on the counter. His ribs hurt, but pain had a useful way of keeping a man awake. "Mrs. Carter has a right to know what is recorded on her land," he said. "Mrs. Carter has been told," Dobbs answered. "Several times. Her late husband left confusion behind him. Sad but not uncommon. Grief often makes families cling to ground they cannot manage." The words were gentle. That made them worse. Jacob thought of Martha's worn hands, Eli trying not to cry beside the fence, Noah covered in snow by the lower pen. "That ground has been managed poorly only since men started circling it," Jacob said. The clerk took in a small breath. Dobbs smiled. It was the smile of a man who had found a nail sticking up and enjoyed the thought of stepping on it. "You have spirit, Mr. Wren. I admire that in a young man when it is properly guided, but spirit does not change law." "Then show me the law." Dobbs's smile thinned. For the first time, his eyes shifted past Jacob toward the window. Eliza Bellamy had stepped down from his wagon. He crossed the street without hurry, coat buttoned, hat low, his face unreadable in the cold light. Eliza remained on the bench, but her hands tightened on the reins. The office door opened again. Eliza Bellamy entered with a gust of winter air, and the kind of silence that made smaller men adjust their collars. "Dobbs," he said. "Eliza." Dobbs gave a polite nod. "I did not know Carter business had become Bellamy business. It became my business when I sent a man there." His eyes moved to Jacob. They paused on the faint bruising near Jacob's jaw, the careful way he held his side, and the deed copy visible beneath his coat edge. Jacob could not read what Eliza thought. That troubled him more than Dobbs. Eliza looked at Finch, opened the ledger. The clerk hesitated. Dobbs spoke softly. "Careful, Abel. Records can be misunderstood by men eager to see what favors them." Eliza did not raise his voice. "Open it." Finch opened the ledger. The pages crackled. He turned back to the Carter entry with fingers that betrayed him. Jacob leaned closer. Eliza stood beside him. Dobbs remained near the door, holding his gloves and watching all of them with an expression smooth enough to hide knives. There it was. Carter Daniel, filed 1876. Then beneath it, in smaller writing, a correction filed in 1879. Jacob read slowly. The correction did not take land from the Carter place. It gave land to it. The North Ridge, the Spring Hollow, and a strip of timber beyond the broken fence had been added after a survey proved Daniel Carter's original boundary had been short by nearly 80 acres. Jacob looked up. "The torn corner," he said. "That is where the correction was written." Finch's eyes dropped. Eliza's jaw shifted once. Dobbs gave a small sigh. "That correction has long been disputed." "By who?" Jacob asked. "Interested parties." "Meaning you?" Dobbs's eyes sharpened. Eliza turned a page in the ledger. "There is no dispute marked here. It was never properly settled." "It was filed," Eliza said. "County seal, clerk witness, 2 signatures." Jacob stared down at the names. One was Daniel Carter. The other was Alvin Dobbs. The room changed. Not loudly. No chair fell. No one shouted. But something invisible stepped into the middle of them and pointed its finger. Jacob looked from the page to Dobbs. "You witnessed the correction." Dobbs slid his glove back onto one hand. "I was present. It does not mean I agreed with the finding." "You knew the ridge belonged to Mrs. Carter." "I knew there were questions." "There were no questions until her husband died." Dobbs's pleasant face hardened at the edges. Eliza closed the ledger, but kept one hand on top of it. "Why do you want that ridge?" Eliza asked. Dobbs laughed once softly. "You ranch men always think in grass and cattle. And you town men always think nobody sees you counting." The smile left Dobbs's face. For a breath, Jacob saw the real man beneath the polished coat, hungry, angry, too used to being obeyed by frightened people. Then the door opened a third time. Eliza stepped inside. Jacob's heart moved before he could stop it. Eliza turned. "Eliza." "I know," she said calmly. "I was told to stay in the wagon." Dobbs's gaze moved over her. "Miss Bellamy, this is hardly a room for delicate ears." Eliza looked at him without blinking, then speak plainly enough for them. Jacob almost smiled. He stopped himself only because his side hurt. Eliza's expression did not change, but one eyebrow lifted in a way Jacob suspected meant trouble for later. Eliza stepped beside her father and looked at the ledger under his hand. "Is Mrs. Carter being cheated?" Nobody answered quickly enough. That was answer enough. Dobbs put his hat on. "This has become an unpleasant gathering. I came only to prevent confusion. If Mrs. Carter chooses to sell, she will do so with full knowledge." "No," Jacob said. She will do so with the missing corner restored. Dobbs looked at him. And how do you intend to restore it? Jacob had no answer. The original deed was torn. The county record proved the correction existed, but Dobbs had influence, and influence could muddy clean water faster than rain. A ledger in a fearful clerk's office might not be enough if Dobbs pressed the matter through men who owed him money. Silas seemed to know it too. He looked at Finch. Is there another copy? Finch swallowed. Surveyor might have kept one. Which surveyor? Earl Maddox. Silas frowned. Maddox left for Helena 2 years ago. He did, Finch said, but his old papers were stored in the back room after he sold the office. Dobbs turned sharply. Those are private papers. Finch flinched. Eliza stepped toward the counter. Private papers stored in a county office. Dobbs's face tightened. Silas looked at Jacob. Back room. Finch hesitated again, then took a key from his vest pocket. I can look, he said, but there are crates. It may take time. Dobbs opened the door. You may waste your afternoon chasing old paper if you like. It will not change Mrs. Carter's circumstances. Winter is coming. Sentiment does not feed cattle. Jacob turned to him. No, he said, but stealing land does not make a man wise. It only makes him patient in the wrong direction. Dobbs held his gaze for a long second. Then he smiled again, and that smile was the coldest thing in the room. Young man, he said, you have no idea what kind of ground you are standing on. He left. Through the window, Jacob watched him cross the street, climb into a black buggy, and speak quickly to the driver. The buggy rolled away toward the north road. Toward the Carter place. Jacob moved first. Silas caught his arm, not hard but firm. You ride after him angry. You will give him what he wants. He is going to Martha. Likely. Then I need to go. You need the proof. Jacob looked at him, torn between the road and the back room. His whole body pulled toward the Carter ranch, toward Eli and Noah and the widow who had trusted him with her fear. Eliza spoke quietly. I can ride. Both men turned toward her. She lifted her chin. I can take the wagon and warn Mrs. Carter. Papa can stay here with Jacob and the clerk. No, Silas said. Papa. No. Her face did not soften. You taught me to handle a team before I was 12. You taught me not to wait for men when something needed doing. Was that only for fair weather? Silas stared at her. Jacob saw the old rancher's fear then. It was small, hidden deep under command, but it was there. Eliza Bellamy had already buried one child. He did not like sending the other toward trouble. I will go with her, Jacob said. Silas's eyes cut to him. Jacob did not back down. You know the records better than I do. You can find the proof faster. I know the Carter Road and I know the place. Silas looked toward the back room, then out the window, then at his daughter. Eliza's voice lowered. Mrs. Carter should not face him alone. That settled it more than any argument could have. Silas turned to Finch. Find that survey copy, every crate, every drawer. Finch nodded quickly. Then Silas looked at Jacob. Do not confront Dobbs unless you have to. Get there. Stand with the widow. Keep your temper. Yes, sir. His gaze moved to Eliza. For once, the sternness on his face did not hide the tenderness beneath it. You stay where Jacob can see you. Eliza almost smiled. That sounds like permission. It is instruction. She took it as both. They left the county office together. The cold struck Jacob's face, but his blood was running too fast to feel it fully. Eliza gathered the reins while Jacob untied his sorrel. For one brief second, beside the wagon, she turned to him. You are hurt, she said. It is not much. That means it is. He looked at her, and all the noise of town seemed to fall away. You came, he said. Papa was riding to town. I told him I had errands. Did you? Yes, she said. One of them was making sure you were alive. A foolish warmth opened in his chest despite everything. Then the black buggy disappeared over the rise north of town. Eliza snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, Jacob riding close beside it, and together they raced toward the Carter ranch with snow clouds gathering again above the hills. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because sometimes one honest choice can change more than one life, and the hardest truth has not reached the porch yet. By the time the Carter house came into view, smoke was rising from the chimney, and Alvin Dobbs was already standing at Martha's door. Alvin Dobbs stood on Martha Carter's porch, as if he owned the boards beneath his polished boots. His black buggy waited near the gate, the driver hunched against the cold. Snow clouds gathered low behind the ridge, bruising the sky purple-gray. The Carter yard looked smaller under that weather, with the barn leaning into the wind and the cattle pressed close to the lower pen. Eli stood near the porch steps with a pitchfork in his hand, trying hard to look like a man and failing only because fear still lived too close to his eyes. Martha Carter stood in the open doorway. Her shawl was wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her face was pale, but she did not step back. Jacob Wren rode in beside Eliza's wagon and felt the whole scene strike him at once. Dobbs had chosen his moment well. He had come while the yard was weak, while winter pressed close, while Eliza Bellamy was in town searching paper crates, and while Martha looked like a woman the world had already tired out. But Dobbs had not expected Eliza. His eyes shifted when she brought the wagon to a sharp stop near the porch. They moved from her face to Jacob's, then down to the way Jacob held his side when he dismounted. A thin smile touched Dobbs's mouth. "Mr. Wren," he said, "you do have a habit of arriving where matters exceed you." Jacob stepped between the buggy and the porch, not close enough to threaten, but close enough that Martha was no longer alone. "I could say the same," Jacob answered. Eliza climbed down from the wagon, gathering her skirt with one hand. She moved to Martha's side, calm and steady, as if standing beside a widow against a land agent was as natural as stepping into church. Martha looked at her in surprise. "Miss Bellamy." "Eliza," she said softly, "my father is at the county office." Dobbs's smile faded at the edges. Martha understood enough from that one sentence. Her hand loosened on the doorframe. Eli looked at Jacob. He said Ma had until supper. Jacob's eyes stayed on Dobbs. Until supper for what? Dobbs sighed like a patient teacher, addressing slow children. "For reason," he said. "Mrs. Carter has received an offer more generous than her circumstances deserve. I have advised her to accept before winter makes the land worth less than sentiment." "My land is not sentiment," Martha said. Dobbs turned to her with practiced sorrow. "Mrs. Carter, your courage is admirable, but courage does not repair fences. Courage does not stretch hay. Courage does not settle boundary confusion." "There is no boundary confusion," Jacob said. Dobbs looked at him. "You read one ledger and think yourself a lawyer." "No, I read one ledger and know when a man is lying." Eli's fingers tightened around the pitchfork. Eliza glanced at him once, warning him without a word to stay still. Dobbs stepped down from the porch. The wind caught his coat and lifted it behind him. He did not look frightened. That troubled Jacob. Men who felt trapped got loud. Dobbs only grew smoother. "You are poor, Mr. Wren," Dobbs said quietly, "and poor men often mistake insult for courage." Jacob felt the words land where Dobbs meant them to. Old shame stirred in him. $11, worn boots, counting coins in the mercantile while Eliza watched, years of being measured by what he lacked. Then he felt the gloves on his hands. Eliza's mended gloves, Martha's trust, Eli's frightened hope, Noah watching from the barn door with his small face half hidden behind the frame. Jacob let the shame pass through him and leave. "You keep calling me poor like I have forgotten," he said. "I know what I own." Dobbs tilted his head. Jacob looked around the yard. "I own a horse tired enough to hate me, a saddle that needs repair, and a coat too thin for this wind. I own no land. I own no cattle. I own no banknote with my name worth reading." His voice stayed even. "But I also own my word, and that is more than some men carry in a fine coat." For the first time, Martha's mouth trembled with something close to hope. Dobbs's eyes hardened. Eliza stepped forward then. "Mr. Dobbs, why did you witness Daniel Carter's boundary correction in 1879, and then tell his widow the correction was uncertain?" Silence dropped over the yard. Eli looked from Eliza to Dobbs. Martha turned slowly, her face tightening. Dobbs did not answer right away. "That is a legal matter," he said at last. "It is a simple question," Eliza said. "Young lady, your father may allow you to speak freely in his house, but this is not his parlor." "No," she said, "it is Mrs. Carter's porch." Jacob looked at her then, and even in danger, something inside him warmed. Eliza Bellamy did not raise her voice. She did not tremble. She simply stood in the cold and spoke truth like it had always belonged to her. Dobbs turned back to Martha. "This is precisely the problem. Outsiders filling your head with false security. When the snow deepens, they will return to their warm homes and leave you with hungry animals and unpaid notes." Martha looked at Jacob. It was not doubt exactly. It was the reflex of a wounded person touching the place where fear had lived too long. Dobbs saw it. He moved closer to her, lowering his voice. "You are a mother. You must think of your boys. Sell now and you can take a house in town. Eli can find work. Noah can attend school proper. Refuse, and by February you may have nothing but frozen cattle and regret." Noah moved at the barn door. Eli said, "Ma." Martha closed her eyes. Jacob wanted to speak, but Eliza touched his sleeve lightly. "Not yet." Martha opened her eyes again. "My husband wanted our boys raised on this land," she said. "Your husband is gone," Dobbs answered. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Martha's face went white. Eli took one step forward with the pitchfork raised. Jacob caught the wooden handle before the boy could move again. "No," Jacob said. Eli's eyes burned. "He can't say that." "He did say it. Let him stand beside it." Dobbs's jaw tightened. Jacob took the pitchfork gently from Eli's hands and leaned it against the porch rail. Then he turned to Martha. "Mrs. Carter, I cannot promise an easy winter. I cannot promise the hay will be enough without careful cutting and hard choices. I cannot promise every animal makes it through, but I can tell you this. The north fence is standing tonight. The lower gate is chained. Eli is learning faster than he knows. Noah is watching everything. Your land record is not empty, and Mr. Bellamy is searching for the survey copy right now." Martha looked at him with tears standing in her eyes. Jacob's voice softened. "Do not sign fear because a man brought it to your door." For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving under the porch boards. Then Martha turned to Dobbs. "I will not sell today." Dobbs stared at her. His polished calm cracked for half a breath. Anger showed through, quick and ugly, before he covered it again. "You are making a grave mistake." "No," Martha said. Her voice shook, but it held. "I am making my own choice." Dobbs leaned closer. "Choices have consequences." Jacob stepped in front of Martha. "So do threats." Dobbs looked at him. The distance between them was no more than 3 feet now. Jacob could smell the faint tobacco on the man's coat. He could see a tiny nick on Dobbs's clean-shaven chin, where his razor had slipped that morning. For a moment, Jacob thought Dobbs might strike him. Instead, Dobbs smiled. "You think this is about one paper," he said softly. "It is not. Carter owed money, more than his widow understands. Notes can be called, credit can vanish. Feed can be hard to buy when merchants become cautious." Martha drew in a sharp breath. Eli whispered, "What notes?" Dobbs looked pleased with the wound he had opened. Jacob knew then that the deed was only part of it. Dobbs had more strings tied around the Carter place. Maybe store credit, maybe a bank note, maybe debt Daniel had hidden from his family to spare them worry. Whatever it was, Dobbs had waited until fear ripened, then come to harvest it. Eliza's eyes moved to Jacob's face. She had heard it too. Dobbs put on his other glove. "I will return," he said to Martha, "and next time I suggest you receive me without hired pride standing in your doorway." He turned and walked to his buggy. No one stopped him. His driver flicked the reins, and the buggy rolled from the yard, wheels cutting dark lines through thin snow. Jacob watched until it reached the trail and turned toward Coulter Bend. Only then did Martha sit down hard on the porch chair. The strength went out of her all at once. Eli rushed to her side. "Ma, what notes?" She covered her mouth. Jacob's chest tightened, not from his bruised ribs this time. "Martha," Eliza said gently, kneeling beside her, "what did your husband owe?" Martha shook her head, tears slipping now. "I do not know. Daniel handled it. After he died, Dobbs brought papers. He said there was store debt, feed debt, doctor debt." Her voice broke. "He said if I sold quiet, he could make it all disappear." Jacob looked toward the road, where Dobbs had vanished. The man had not come to buy land. He had come to corner grief. That evening, the Carter kitchen filled with a different kind of cold. Martha found every bill, note, and receipt she could gather. Eliza sat at the table sorting them into piles. Eli stood near the stove, silent and angry. Noah leaned against Jacob's chair, too tired to pretend he was not scared. Jacob read slowly. He was not learned in law, but numbers had a language of their own. Some debts were real, some were old, some had no signature. One feed receipt had Daniel Carter's mark, but the date was 3 weeks after his funeral. Jacob pushed it toward Eliza. She saw it and went still. "This one is false," she whispered. Martha looked up. Before anyone could answer, a horse sounded in the yard. Jacob rose too fast and winced at his ribs. Eli reached for the stove poker. Eliza stood, one hand braced on the table. A knock came at the door. Not Dobbs's soft tap. A firm, heavy knock. Martha opened it. Eliza Bellamy stood in the doorway with snow on his hat and a rolled paper tied in twine beneath his arm. His eyes moved over the room, from Martha's tear-streaked face to the papers on the table, to Jacob standing with one hand pressed against his side. Then he lifted the roll. "We found the survey," Eliza said. Jacob felt the room breathe again. But Eliza did not smile. "And we found something else in Maddox's crate," he added. "Something Dobbs would have burned if he had reached it first." Eliza Bellamy stepped into the Carter kitchen with snow on his shoulders and trouble in his eyes. No one spoke at first. The room was too full already. Papers covered the table. A false feed receipt lay beneath Eliza's hand. Martha Carter stood near the door with the tired face of a woman who had just learned grief was not the only thing trying to take from her. Eli held the stove poker low at his side, ashamed of needing it and unwilling to put it down. Noah stood half behind Jacob's chair, watching Eliza like the old rancher had brought judgment itself in with the cold. Eliza shut the door behind him. He removed his hat, shook snow from the brim, and placed it on a peg near the wall. Only then did he look at Martha. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I owe you plain speaking." Martha gripped the back of a chair. "Then speak plain." Silas untied the twine around the rolled paper and opened it across the table. Eliza moved the receipts aside quickly. The paper was a survey map, worn at the edges but whole. It showed the Carter Ranch in careful black lines, the creek, the ridge, the timber strip, and the spring hollow beyond the broken north fence. Silas tapped the ridge with one thick finger. "This is yours." Martha's eyes filled, but she did not cry. "All of it." "All of it, filed proper in 1879. Eli leaned over the table. "Then Dobbs lied." "Yes," Silas said. The answer came so bluntly that the boy blinked. Silas reached inside his coat and drew out a second packet. This one was smaller, folded in oilcloth. He laid it beside the survey map, but his hand stayed on it for a moment. "This is what we found under Maddox's old account book," he said. "The surveyor kept notes on every correction he made. Most men would have thrown them away. Maddox did not." Jacob watched Silas's face. The older man looked colder than the storm outside. "What does it say?" Jacob asked. Silas opened the packet. Inside were 3 pages, written in a tight hand, a field note, a statement, and a letter addressed to Daniel Carter but never delivered. Eliza lifted the letter carefully. Her eyes moved across the first lines. The color left her face. "Papa," she whispered. Silas nodded once, grim. Martha's voice trembled. "What is it?" Eliza swallowed and read aloud, slowly enough that every word could settle. "Mr. Carter, I write to warn you that Mr. Alvin Dobbs has asked me to delay filing the corrected north boundary. He claims the ridge will be of greater value within a few years, though he would not state why. I refused. Your claim is lawful. I advise you to keep your deed copy safe and speak of this matter to no one who has business with Dobbs." The kitchen went silent. Jacob looked at the map again, at the spring hollow, at the strip of timber, at the ridge that Dobbs had tried so hard to pry loose from a widow's hands. "What value?" Eli asked. "It's rocks and trees." Silas did not answer right away. That delay told Jacob the answer mattered. Eliza looked up from the paper. "Papa." Silas's jaw worked once beneath his mustache. "There is coal in the North Ridge," he said. Martha sat down, as if her knees had given way. Noah whispered, "Coal." Silas nodded. "Not a great mine, maybe, but enough. Maddox noted black seam signs near the cutbank above the spring. Dobbs must have heard. He has been buying poor claims along that ridge for years." Jacob felt anger move through him, slow and heavy. The false receipts, the torn deed, the talk of confusion, the pressure to sell before winter, it had not been simple greed for land. Dobbs had seen profit under a widow's grief, and tried to bury the truth deep enough that she would hand it to him for pennies. Martha covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook once. Eli turned toward the door. "I'll kill him." "No," Jacob said. The boy spun on him, tears bright with rage. "He tried to steal Pa's land." "I know. He scared Ma, he lied. He came here like we were nothing." "I know. Then why not?" Jacob stood slowly, one hand against his ribs. "Because if you run to him with anger, he wins twice. He takes your peace, then he takes your future while you sit in a jail cell or worse." Eli's face twisted. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Jacob looked at the survey map, then the papers, then Martha. "You stand straight. You learn every line of that land. You help your mother protect it in the open where people can see." Silas looked at Jacob then. For a moment the room held 2 generations of men who understood the same hard truth. The frontier praised quick fists, but most families were saved by quieter courage. Paper kept safe. Witnesses found. Neighbors told. Men standing firm in daylight. Martha lowered her hands. Her voice was small but clear. Can he still call the debts? Silas gathered the false receipt from the table and looked at it. He can try, but this one is forged. If there are more like it, we can break his hold. We, Martha asked. Silas met her eyes. Yes, we. Jacob saw something pass across Martha's face then, not relief exactly, but the shock of being helped without being owned. Eliza squeezed her hand. You are not alone in this, she said. Martha turned toward Jacob. And you were sent here for winter work, not this. Jacob thought of Silas standing on the Bellamy porch, saying there was no promise at the end. He thought of his own fast yes. At the time, he had believed he was proving himself for Eliza. Now he knew better. A man did not become good because someone watched him. He either brought his whole self to the place of need, or he did not. I was sent here, Jacob said, to do what needed doing. Martha's eyes filled again. Silas cleared his throat. We leave before dawn, he said. I will take the survey, the letter, and the false receipt to Judge Callahan in Millbrook. Dobbs has influence in Coulter Bend, less in Millbrook. Eliza looked at him. I am going. No. Papa. The word carried warning now, not pleading. Silas turned toward her with the weary look of a man who had fought this battle before and lost more than once. You have done enough today. I have not. This is not a shopping road, Eliza. I know the difference. Jacob did not speak. This was father and daughter ground, and a poor cowboy had no right to place a boot on it unless invited. Eliza stepped closer to Silas. Mrs. Carter will need someone here who can read the papers and keep the boys calm. Jacob cannot ride far with his ribs like that. You need someone in the wagon who can write what Judge Callahan says, remember names, and not be frightened by Dobbs if he appears. Silas folded his arms. And that is you. Yes. Silas looked at Jacob. His eyes held a question he did not say aloud. Can she do this? Jacob answered carefully. She did it today. Eliza looked at him, and for half a breath the fear in the room softened into something warmer. Silas exhaled through his nose. Your mother will blame me. My mother will say she expected this. That almost made Martha smile. Silas rubbed a hand over his face. Fine, you ride in the wagon, you stay with me. You do not step into any room first. Eliza nodded, agreed. Jacob doubted she meant it fully, but Silas seemed too tired to challenge the edges. They spent the next hour sorting every debt paper Martha owned. Silas marked what looked proper. Eliza copied names and dates. Jacob found 2 more receipts that smelled wrong. One had Daniel's mark written too neatly. Another charged for winter feed delivered in July, when the Carter herd would have been on grass and no man with sense would have bought that much hay. Eli sat beside Jacob, learning to look at dates, marks, and witness lines. Men steal with ink too, Jacob told him quietly. Eli nodded, anger still in his face but steadier now. Near midnight, Martha made coffee. It was weak, but nobody complained. The storm returned outside, tapping ice against the windows. Noah fell asleep with his head on his folded arms. Eliza covered him with her shawl without thinking, then shivered and pretended she was not cold. Jacob noticed. He moved his coat from the chair and held it toward her. She shook her head. You need it. You gave me gloves. That was different. How? Her eyes met his across the lamplight. I wanted you to come back. The room seemed to fall away again, just for them. Jacob's throat tightened. I still do. Eliza took the coat then, not because she was cold, though she was, but because refusing would have turned something honest into pride. Silas saw the exchange. He said nothing. but Jacob felt the older man's gaze settle on him, with a weight that was not unkind. Before dawn, Silas and Eliza prepared to leave for Millbrook with the papers hidden beneath the wagon seat. Martha stood on the porch with her sons beside her. Snow lay thin across the yard, and the cattle shifted in the gray light. Silas climbed into the wagon and took the reins. Eliza paused before stepping up. She looked at Jacob. "Rest today." He almost laughed. "There is work." "Then do less of it." "I am not good at that." "I know." She looked at him for one more moment, then touched the mended thumb of the gloves he wore. "Keep your hands warm," she said. He lowered his voice. "Come back safe." "I will do my best." He heard his own words from her mouth and felt them settle deep. The wagon rolled out at first light, carrying the proof toward Millbrook. Jacob watched until it vanished beyond the ridge. Then a sound came from the barn. A horse snorted, sharp and frightened. Eli turned. What was that? Jacob was already moving. They reached the barn and found the back door hanging open. Cold air poured through. One saddle horse was gone. On the inside wall, pinned with a knife to the feed post, was a note written in a hand Jacob did not know. "Stop chasing papers, or the next thing missing will not be a horse." Part 8. The note on the feed post did not shout. It did not need to. "Stop chasing papers, or the next thing missing will not be a horse." Jacob Wren stood in the cold barn with the knife still buried in the wood and read the words twice. Eli read them over his shoulder, breathing hard through his nose. Noah stood behind them in the doorway, barefoot inside his boots, his hair wild from sleep and his eyes wide with the kind of fear children remember long after they become men. The stolen horse was Martha Carter's old bay gelding, the steady one used for wagon work and short rides to the creek pasture. Not the best horse on the place, not the fastest, not worth enough to change a man's fortune. That was the point. Whoever took him was not stealing for profit. He was sending a message. Eli reached for the knife. Jacob caught his wrist. "Leave it." "It's our knife." "I know." "Then let me pull it out." "Not yet." Eli jerked his arm back. "You keep telling me not yet." Jacob turned to him, because anger moves faster than sense. "My horse is gone." "And Eliza is on the road with your proof," Jacob said, voice low but firm. "If this was meant to scare us, it was also meant to pull us apart. We do not help him do that." Eli looked away, jaw tight, eyes wet with rage. Martha came in then with a shawl over her nightdress and a lantern in her hand. The light shook across the barn boards as she saw the empty stall, then the note. For one moment, she looked as if something inside her folded. Then Noah whispered, "Ma." Martha straightened. That small voice reached her where fear could not. She stepped past Jacob and put one hand on Noah's shoulder, the other on Eli's arm. "No one leaves this yard alone," she said. Jacob nodded. "That is right." Eli looked at him. "So we just stand here?" "No," Jacob said, "we look." They found tracks behind the barn, though the snow had begun to crust and the wind had worked against them. One horse led out. One man on foot beside it for the first 20 yards. Then boot marks turned back toward the south ridge, and the horse tracks continued east. Jacob crouched, pain biting through his ribs. Eli crouched beside him. "What do you see?" Jacob asked. The boy frowned at the ground. "Horse went east." "Yes." "Man went south." "Yes." "He let the horse go." "Maybe," Jacob pointed to a faint drag mark near the prints, "or tied it to another horse out of sight." Eli leaned closer. "Why split?" "So anyone following quick would chase the horse and miss the man." Eli's eyes lifted. "You think he's still near?" "I think he wanted us to wonder that." Martha stood a few steps behind them, holding Noah close. The yard felt different now. The open land around the Carter place no longer looked empty. Every ridge could hold eyes. Every cottonwood shadow seemed deeper than it had before. Jacob stood carefully. "We bring the cattle tighter to the lower pasture," he said. "We bar the barn at night. Eli, you and I will fix that back latch today. Noah, you stay where your mother can see you." Noah nodded fast. Martha looked toward the east track. "And the horse?" Jacob hated the answer before he gave it. "If we chase him blind, we risk more than a horse. We wait for Silas and Eliza." Eli kicked at the snow. "Pa would have ridden." Martha flinched. Jacob let the words sit there for one breath. Then he said, "Maybe. And maybe if your father were standing here, he would look at your mother, your brother, this ranch, and decide a horse can be found after the house is safe." Eli's face burned. He stormed past them into the barn, but he did not saddle anything. That was enough for now. The day became a long line of small defenses. Jacob did less than his pride wanted and more than his ribs allowed. He and Eli fitted a new crossbar on the back barn door. They moved the grain sacks away from the wall where someone could reach them through broken boards. They hung a bell wire from the barn latch to an empty tin near Martha's bedroom window. It was crude, but if the door opened at night, the tin would rattle hard enough to wake the house. Noah followed them at a distance, carrying nails like precious coins. When Jacob gave him a task, the boy did it with solemn care. At noon, Martha brought bread and coffee to the barn because nobody wanted to sit too far from the animals. The bread was dry, but she had warmed it against the stove, and the simple heat of it felt like kindness. Eli ate standing up. After a while he said, "I'm sorry I said Pa would have ridden." Martha looked at him. The boy kept his eyes on the ground. "I know you're trying." Martha's face trembled, but she held herself together. She reached out and brushed snowmelt from his sleeve. "I know you miss him," she said. Eli nodded once, quick and hard. Jacob looked away, giving them the privacy a small barn could allow. By mid-afternoon, the sky cleared, but the cold deepened. The mountains shone white beyond the ridge. Wind dragged loose snow across the yard in thin, shining lines. No wagon appeared from the Millbrook Road. Jacob did not say he was worried. He did not need to. Eli watched the road every 10 minutes. Martha watched it every 5. Noah asked twice how long court roads were. "Longer when you wait," Jacob told him. Near dusk, Eli found something snagged in a wire fence east of the barn. A torn strip of black cloth. Jacob took it between 2 fingers. It was fine cloth, not the coarse kind a ranch hand wore. A town coat, maybe, or a driver's sleeve. There was a faint smell on it, not sweat or horse, but something sharper. Lamp oil. Jacob folded it and put it in his pocket. Eli's eyes narrowed. Dobbs. Maybe someone working for him. You always say maybe. Because saying more than you know is how men get foolish. Eli looked toward the road again. What if they stop Miss Bellamy and your proof? Jacob had been carrying that fear all day. He looked north, where the road dipped between 2 ridges before turning toward Millbrook. Silas is with her. That means something. Yes. What? Jacob thought of Eliza Bellamy's cold eyes, his steady voice, his way of moving through danger like a man who had already measured it and found no reason to hurry. It means anyone trying to stop that wagon better bring more courage than sense. Eli seemed to like that. The first star showed before they heard wheels. Martha came out of the house. Eli ran to the gate. Noah pushed past Jacob, then stopped when his mother called his name. Jacob stepped into the yard, one hand near the rail, listening. A wagon came over the rise. Not Sila's S. It was smaller, darker, pulled by one lathered horse. For a moment, no one moved. Then the wagon reached the yard, and the driver slumped forward. Jacob ran despite the pain in his side. The driver was Abel Finch, the county clerk. His spectacles hung crooked from one ear, and his coat was torn at the shoulder. He looked half frozen and scared fully through. Jacob caught him before he fell from the seat. "Finch." The clerk gripped Jacob's sleeve with icy fingers. "Bellamy," he gasped. "The Millbrook Road." Martha lifted the lantern. "Where is Miss Bellamy?" Finch swallowed, shaking so hard his teeth clicked. "Dobbs had men at Willow Cut," he said. "They blocked the road. Bellamy turned the wagon off before they reached him. He told me to ride here." Jacob felt the whole yard tilt. "Eliza?" he asked. Finch looked at him with frightened eyes. "She stayed with her father." Eli whispered, "What happened?" Finch tried to answer, but coughing took him. Jacob helped him down, and Martha wrapped her shawl around his shoulders. "Say it plain," Jacob said. Finch looked toward the dark hills. "Silas said if he did not reach Millbrook by morning, take the second packet to Judge Callahan." He fumbled inside his coat and pulled out a folded oilcloth bundle. "He gave me this before he turned off." Jacob took it. His hands felt suddenly cold, even inside Eliza's gloves. Martha stared at the road. "Where did he turn?" "Old Timber Trail," Finch said, "toward the abandoned line shack above Willow Creek." Jacob knew it, a rough trail, narrow, easy to lose in darkness, hard for a wagon, worse if men followed. Eli stepped forward. "We ride." Jacob looked at the boy. This time he did not say no quickly. Night was falling. Silas and Eliza were somewhere in the hills with Dobbs's men between them and the law. The Carter place was still under threat, but Finch had brought the second packet. The proof was here. If they could get it to Millbrook, Dobbs's paper game might end. But Eliza was not paper. Eliza was on a dark trail, with winter closing in. Jacob turned to Martha. "Can you hold the place until morning?" She looked afraid, but she did not look weak anymore. "Yes." He turned to Eli. "You saddle 2 horses, quietly. No lantern once we leave the yard." Eli ran. Noah grabbed Jacob's coat. "Bring Miss Eliza back." Jacob crouched, ignoring the pain. "I will do everything I can." The boy's lip shook. "That is what you always say." Jacob put a hand on his shoulder. "Because it is the only promise an honest man should make before he knows what the road will ask." Martha pressed the oilcloth packet back into his hand. "No," Jacob said, "this should go to Millbrook." "Finch can take it at first light with Noah and me watching the yard," she said. "But if Dobbs catches you, you may need more than courage." Jacob looked at the packet, then tucked it inside his coat beside the place where Eliza's gloves had once rested. As Eli brought the horses, Martha stepped close and lowered her voice. "Jacob, if you find them, do not throw your life away trying to prove yourself." He looked toward the black line of the timber trail. For a moment he saw the Bellamy porch again, Silas asking what he owned, Eliza giving him gloves, the north road waiting. "I am done proving myself," Jacob said softly. "Now I am just going for the people who matter." If you believe real courage is quiet until the moment it is needed, stay with this story. The night road is opening now, and what waits at Willow Creek may change every heart before morning. Jacob and Eli rode out under a hard, cold sky. Behind them, the Carter house shrank into lantern light. Ahead beyond the ridge, a single distant shot cracked through the dark. Not close, but close enough. The shot rolled across the hills and faded into the dark like a door closing far away. Jacob Wren pulled his horse hard at the ridge crest. Eli stopped beside him, breathing fast, his young face pale beneath his hat. The night around them was wide and bitter. The stars had come out sharp above the broken clouds, but down in the draws and timber cuts, darkness lay thick enough to hide a man 10 feet away. Eli whispered, "Was that from Willow Creek?" Jacob listened. The wind moved through dry grass. A horse snorted beneath him. Somewhere in the black timber, a branch cracked under weight, or under frost, or under something else moving. "I think so," Jacob said. "We have to hurry." "Yes," Jacob said, "but not blind." Eli looked at him like he hated the answer. Miss Bellamy could be hurt. The words struck Jacob in the chest, but he did not let them touch his hands. Panic made a man loud. Fear made him careless. Careless men got the people they loved killed. He leaned toward Eli. "From here on, we ride low and slow. No calling out unless we see them. If men are waiting, we hear them before they hear us." Eli nodded, though every part of him wanted to run. They left the open ridge and followed the old timber trail west. It was hardly a trail anymore, just a narrow cut between pine and cottonwood, with roots breaking the frozen ground and old wagon ruts filled with crusted snow. The moon slipped in and out behind clouds, giving them pieces of the path and then stealing them away. Jacob rode with his coat pulled tight, the oilcloth packet pressed against his chest. Martha Carter's land proof lay under his shirt, close to his skin. Eliza's gloves held the reins. His ribs throbbed with every turn of the saddle. He did not think about pain. He thought about Eliza on a wagon seat beside her father, facing men hired by Dobbs. He thought about Eliza Bellamy, hard-eyed and proud, turning off the road with the proof hidden in his daughter beside him. He thought about the shot. One shot could mean warning. One shot could mean a horse put down. One shot could mean someone missed. Or someone did not. They found the first sign near the mouth of Willow Cut. A wheel mark had gouged deep into soft ground where the wagon had turned too sharply. Beside it were hoof marks, 3 horses at least, maybe 4. One horse had slid, leaving a long scrape down the slope. Jacob dismounted and touched the snow with his bare fingertips after pulling one glove off. "Still loose." "Recent." Eli leaned down from the saddle. "Is it them?" "Eliza's wagon went this way," Jacob said. "Others followed." Eli swallowed. "How far ahead?" "Not far." He pulled the glove back on and mounted. They moved deeper into the cut. The land narrowed around them. Willow Creek ran somewhere below, half frozen and hidden under brush. The old line shack sat above the creek on a flat place near a stand of dead pines. Jacob had slept there once during a cattle drive. It had one door, one window, a stove pipe that leaned like a drunk, and walls strong enough to stop wind but not much else. A faint glow showed through the trees ahead. Jacob raised one hand. Eli stopped. The glow came low and weak, not from a campfire outside but from a lantern inside the shack. Shapes moved near it. A horse stamped. Another answered from farther left. Jacob slid from his saddle and tied the reins to a branch. Eli did the same. "Stay behind me," Jacob whispered. Eli nodded, then gripped Jacob's sleeve. "If they hurt her." Jacob looked at him. The boy's anger was still there, but fear had changed its shape. Eliza was not only the rancher's daughter to him now. She had sat at his kitchen table, read his mother's papers, covered Noah with her shawl, and stood against Dobbs when his own voice shook. The Carter boys had begun to count her among the people who came and stayed. "We get them out," Jacob said. "That comes first." They crept through brush until they could see the clearing. Eliza's wagon stood crooked near the shack, one wheel sunk in a rut. 2 saddle horses were tied near the pines. A man with a rifle stood beside them, his back half turned. Another man paced near the door. Jacob recognized neither, but he knew the type. Hired hard faces. Men who borrowed courage from whoever paid them. Inside the shack, voices rose. Eliza Bellamy's voice came first, low and dangerous. You touch that paper again and you will lose the hand. A man laughed. Then Jacob heard Eliza. Papa, don't. Her voice was steady, but Jacob heard the strain under it. Something in him went cold. Eli shifted beside him. Jacob caught his arm before he could move. The pacing man near the door spoke toward the shack. Dobbs said, hold them till morning, that's all. We ain't paid for killing. The man inside answered, then quit talking like a preacher and watch the girl. Jacob's jaw tightened. He counted again. One by the horses, one by the door, one inside, maybe two. Silas and Eliza were alive, that was something. The proof might still be with them or might not. Then a horse whinnied from the dark east side of the clearing. Jacob turned his head. A bay gelding stood tied beneath a cottonwood, half hidden in shadow. Martha Carter's stolen horse. Eli saw it too, his breath caught. Jacob leaned close to his ear. You think you can get to that horse without being seen? Eli looked at the shadows, then at the man near the door. Maybe. Do not untie him yet, just get there. When I make noise, lead him toward the wagon team and slap him hard. Make the horses move. Eli stared. You want them loose? I want confusion. What about you? Jacob looked at the shack. I am going inside. Eli grabbed his sleeve harder. Alone. Not for long. The boy's face twisted. You always say not to be foolish. I am listening to my own advice as much as I can. That ain't much. Despite the danger, Jacob almost smiled. Then he became serious again. Eli, if things go wrong, you ride back with the packet. He pulled the oilcloth bundle from inside his coat. Eli shook his head. No. Listen to me. No. Jacob pushed the packet into his hands. This is your mother's land. This is your future. Eliza and Silas risked themselves to protect it. If I fall, you do not run to me. You run to Millbrook. Eli's eyes filled. Don't say that. Jacob held his gaze. A man has to know what matters most before the hard moment comes. The boy clutched the packet against his coat. You better not fall, he whispered. I will do my best. Eli moved first, low through the brush, toward the stolen horse. Jacob waited until he saw the boy vanish into the darker edge of the clearing. Then he picked up a stone, weighed it in his hand, and threw it hard toward the far trees. It struck a dead trunk with a crack. The guard by the horses turned. What was that? The man by the door lifted his rifle. Check it. The first guard stepped away from the horses, cursing under his breath. Jacob moved. He crossed the open ground fast, staying low, pain burning through his side. The door guard turned back too soon. His eyes widened. Jacob hit him with his shoulder before the rifle came up. Both men crashed against the shack wall. The rifle fell into the snow. Inside, someone shouted. Jacob drove one fist into the guard's stomach, shoved him aside, and kicked the door open. The shack was lit by one lantern hanging from a nail. Silas stood near the stove with blood at the corner of his mouth, his hands tied in front of him but his shoulders still squared. Eliza stood against the back wall, pale, her bonnet gone, one sleeve torn at the cuff. A thick man in a brown coat held a pistol low, not aimed but ready. His eyes snapped to Jacob. You! Jacob did not wait. He threw himself sideways as the pistol rose. The shot struck the doorframe behind him, splintering wood. Eliza cried out. Silas lunged, tied hands and all, slamming into the man's arm. The pistol fired again into the ceiling. Outside, horses screamed. Eli had done his part. The clearing erupted with hooves, shouts, wood cracking, and men swearing in panic. The stolen bay tore through the wagon team, pulling reins loose and sending one horse back hard against the traces. The guard outside shouted for help. Another man yelled that the horses were loose. Jacob grabbed the thick man's wrist as he fought Silas. The man was stronger, heavier, and fresh. Jacob was hurt and tired, but he had spent his life wrestling stock, weather, and hunger. He drove his knee into the man's thigh, twisted the pistol hand toward the wall, and slammed it once. The gun dropped. Eliza kicked it under the cot. Silas struck the man with both tied fists, a short, brutal blow that sent him stumbling into the stove. The stove pipe rattled. Sparks jumped from the iron mouth. The man cursed and went down to one knee. Jacob turned to Eliza. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Can you run?" "Yes." Silas barked, "Cut me loose." Jacob pulled a knife from his belt and sawed through the rope around Silas's wrists. His hands were stiff and clumsy inside the gloves. Eliza caught the rope and pulled it away faster. Outside, a man shouted, "Fire!" Jacob spun. The stove pipe had slipped loose from the ceiling joint. Sparks had caught in a pile of dry kindling beside the wall. A thin flame climbed fast along old wood, hungry from years of dust. Silas grabbed Eliza's arm. Out. The thick man on the floor lunged for the pistol under the cot. Jacob saw him. So did Silas. Silas shoved Eliza toward the door and turned back, but the smoke thickened at once. Jacob kicked the pistol farther under the cot and grabbed the man by the coat. "Move!" The man swung at him. Jacob's ribs took the blow, and white pain tore through him so hard his knees almost folded. Eliza shouted his name. Silas dragged the man up from behind and shoved him toward the door with more strength than Jacob would have believed. They stumbled out into freezing air as smoke poured after them. The shack wall caught fully then. Flame rose through the dry boards, bright against the dark. The hired men scattered toward their horses, but the horses were loose or wild, running in circles at the edge of the clearing. Eli appeared from the trees leading the stolen bay and Jacob's sorrel, his face streaked with sweat and snow. "I got him," he shouted. The door guard tried to run past him. Eli swung the loose rein hard, not like a man fighting for pride, but like a boy defending his home. The leather snapped across the guard's face. The man stumbled long enough for Silas to seize him by the collar and throw him against the wagon wheel. For a moment, everything was fire, breath, and confusion. Then a new sound came down the trail. Hooves. Several horses. A voice called through the dark, "Eliza Bellamy." Jacob turned, half expecting Dobbs. But the first rider into the clearing wore a sheriff's star on his coat. Behind him rode two men from Millbrook and Abel Finch, clinging to a saddle like a man who had discovered bravery late and was not comfortable with it. The sheriff took in the scene at once: the burning shack, the tied marks on Silas's wrists, Eliza's torn sleeve, the hired men trying to look innocent and failing, Eli holding the stolen horse, Jacob standing with one hand pressed against his ribs, smoke in his hair, and Eliza's gloves blackened at the knuckles. "Anybody care to explain?" the sheriff asked. Silas pointed at the thick man near the wagon. "Start with him." The thick man spat into the snow. "We never meant harm," Dobbs said. "Just delay them." The clearing went silent. The sheriff's eyes sharpened. Dobbs said. The man realized too late what his fear had given away. Jacob looked at Eli. "The packet." Eli stepped forward and handed the oilcloth bundle to the sheriff with both hands. "Sir," he said, voice shaking but clear, "this belongs to my ma, and Mr. Dobbs tried to steal it." The sheriff opened the bundle under lantern light. Silas added the survey paper from inside his coat, bent but safe. Eliza stood beside Jacob, close enough that her shoulder almost touched his arm. Her hand found his sleeve, and for one quiet second in all that smoke and cold, she held on. The sheriff read only a few lines before his face grew hard. "Where is Dobbs now?" he asked. No one answered. Then from the ridge above the clearing came the sound of a single horse turning sharply on frozen ground. Jacob looked up. A rider had been watching from the dark. The sheriff shouted, "Stop!" The rider wheeled and vanished down the far side of Willow Cut. Silas grabbed a loose horse's bridle, but Jacob caught his arm. "No," Jacob said, "not in the dark, not with Eliza here, not with proof in hand." Silas looked ready to argue. Then he saw his daughter's face. He let the bridle go. The sheriff sent 2 men after the rider anyway, but Jacob knew the hills were wide, and Dobbs had planned more escape roads than honest men planned fences. The line shack burned behind them until the roof fell in with a sigh of sparks. No one died that night. But by morning, all of Coulter Bend would know what Alvin Dobbs had done. And men like Dobbs, once cornered in daylight, did not surrender quietly. By sunrise, the truth reached Coulter Bend before Alvin Dobbs did. The sheriff rode in from Willow Creek with 3 hired men tied behind his party, Eliza Bellamy beside him, Eliza wrapped in her father's coat, and Jacob Wren riding slowly at the rear with his ribs burning and smoke still dark on his shirt cuffs. Eli rode near him on Martha Carter's stolen bay, sitting tall in the saddle though his face showed he had not slept and had seen more in one night than any boy should. The town was just waking when they came down the main street. Doors opened, curtains moved. The blacksmith stepped out with his apron still on. Mrs. Hanley came from the mercantile steps with a flour sack in her arms and stopped cold when she saw the sheriff. Men who had taken coffee with Dobbs every morning suddenly found the street dust interesting. Alvin Dobbs was standing outside his office. He had changed coats. His hair was combed. His face wore the calm look of a man prepared to call every accusation a misunderstanding. Then he saw the survey paper in the sheriff's hand. The calm did not leave all at once. It slipped, just a little, like a loose board under a boot. "Sheriff," Dobbs called, "you have had a busy night." The sheriff dismounted, busy enough. Dobbs looked past him at Silas. "I trust no one was harmed by this confusion." Silas stepped down from his wagon. The marks from the rope still showed red on his wrists. Blood had dried near his mouth, and one side of his coat was torn. "Confusion did not tie my hands," Silas said. A low murmur moved through the street. Dobbs lifted both hands slightly. "I know nothing of that." One of the hired men tied near the sheriff's horse raised his head. "That ain't what you said last night," he muttered. Dobbs turned on him so sharply that the man looked down again, but the damage was already done. The sheriff walked up the steps to Dobbs's office. "Alvin Dobbs, you are coming with me." Dobbs's smile went thin. "On what charge?" "Forgery, land fraud, threatening a widow, hiring men to obstruct lawful papers, and whatever Judge Callahan adds after breakfast." Dobbs looked around the street then. That was when he finally understood. The town was watching. Not in shadows, not through whispered deals, not behind closed office doors where fear could be sold as advice. People stood in the open, seeing him with his clean coat and hearing the charges named one by one. Men like Dobbs could survive rumors. They could not survive daylight. He pointed at Jacob. "This is his doing. A poor cowhand stirred up grief and fed lies to a frightened woman. He wants Bellamy's daughter and thinks playing hero will buy him a place above his blood." The words hit the street hard. Jacob felt every eye move toward him. For most of his life, being called poor had made him want to shrink, not because he was ashamed of work, but because men like Dobbs knew how to turn poverty into a stain. They said poor and meant unworthy. They said poor and meant desperate. They said poor and meant a man's truth cost less. Jacob stepped down from his horse slowly. Eliza moved as if to help him, then stopped when she saw his face. He stood before Dobbs with Eliza's blackened gloves on his hands, and $11 still folded inside his coat. "You are right about one thing," Jacob said. The street quieted. "I am poor." Dobbs gave a small, cruel smile. Jacob continued. "I came to Mr. Bellamy's porch with almost nothing. I rode to Widow Carter's with almost nothing. I have no fine office, no land deed, no rich name, no friends in ledgers, no bank note that makes men step aside." His voice did not rise. "But I did not tear a widow's deed. I did not forge a dead man's mark. I did not frighten children to steal coal under their land. I did not hire men to stop a father and daughter on a dark road." Dobbs's smile vanished. Jacob took one step closer. "So if poverty is the worst thing you can say of me, Mr. Dobbs, I will carry it easier than you carry your riches." For a moment no one breathed. Then Mrs. Hanley spoke from the mercantile steps. "That boy pulled my wagon out of the mud last summer." The blacksmith nodded. "Fixed my corral gate once and would not take money for it." A ranch hand near the livery called out. "I rode with him at Bar T. He never left work half done." Another voice said, "Dobbs tried buying my claim too." Then another, "Mine as well." The street changed. Fear, once spoken aloud by more than one person, began to lose its teeth. The sheriff took Dobbs by the arm. Dobbs jerked once, but the sheriff held firm. "This is not finished," Dobbs said through clenched teeth. Silas looked at him. "No, but your part in it is." The sheriff led him away. No one cheered. It was not that kind of morning. Justice on the frontier did not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it came tired, cold, and covered in road dust, carrying folded papers saved from fire. By noon, Judge Callahan had read the survey, the letter, the false receipts, and the clerk's statement. Martha Carter's North Ridge was confirmed before witnesses. The forged debts were marked for formal challenge. Dobbs's office was searched, and 3 more land papers from poor families were found hidden in a locked drawer. By evening, Coulter Bend knew that Martha Carter had not been foolish to hold her land. She had been right. Jacob did not stay in town for praise. He rode back to the Carter place with Martha, Eli, Noah, Silas, and Eliza. The boys fell asleep in the wagon before the first ridge. Martha sat with the survey copy held in both hands, not clutching it in fear anymore, but holding it the way a person holds something returned from the dead. When they reached the ranch, the late sun had broken through the clouds. It touched the North Ridge, the same ridge Dobbs had tried to steal, and turned the snow along the rocks to pale gold. Martha stood in the yard and looked at it for a long time. Then she began to cry. Not the frightened crying of the night before. Not the quiet, hidden crying Eli had heard through the wall. These were full tears, tired tears, relieved tears. Eli put his arm around her. Noah buried his face against her side. The 3 of them stood together in the cold yard while the cattle shifted behind the fence and the old house leaned east, still standing. Jacob turned away to give them privacy. Silas stood beside him. For a while neither man spoke. Then Silas said, "You disobeyed me." Jacob looked at him. "I expect I did." "I told you not to confront Dobbs unless you had to." "I had to." Silas nodded slowly. "That is what Eliza said you would say." Jacob glanced toward Eliza. She stood near the wagon, wrapping the reins around the brake handle. Her hair had loosened from its pins, and soot marked one sleeve. She looked tired, brave, and more dear to him than any dream he had allowed himself before that winter. Silas watched him watching her. "You still have $11, he asked. Jacob almost smiled. "Yes, sir." "No land?" "No, sir." "No cattle?" "No, sir." Silas looked toward the Carter house. then the ridge, then the barn door Jacob had barred with his own hands. "You came here to win my permission," Silas said. "But somewhere along the road you forgot to make yourself look good." Jacob did not know how to answer. Silas turned to him fully. "You looked after a widow when there was no reward. You taught a boy to stand instead of strike. You guarded papers that did not bear your name. You went after my daughter because she mattered, not because saving her would buy you anything." His voice grew quieter. "A man can have money and still be small. A man can have nothing and still bring shelter with him." Jacob's throat tightened. Silas looked across the yard at Eliza. "My daughter does not need a rich man," he said. "She needs a good one." Jacob remembered the porch, the cold morning, the first time those words had been spoken with the answer still hidden behind them. Now Silas looked back at him. "And I know what you are." Jacob could not speak. Silas held out his hand. It was not a soft gesture. It was not dramatic. It was the hand of a rancher who measured men slowly and did not change his mind once the truth stood clear. Jacob took it. Silas's grip was firm, warm, and final. "You have my blessing to court Eliza proper," Silas said. "And if she has the sense I think she has, you will need to start saving for more than saddle repairs." Jacob laughed once, but it came out rough. Across the yard, Eliza looked over. She knew before anyone told her. Her eyes filled slowly, and she walked toward them with both hands folded at her waist. She stopped in front of her father first. "Papa." Silas cleared his throat. "Do not make me say it twice." Eliza smiled through tears, then kissed his cheek. Silas looked away fast, pretending to study the fence. Then Eliza turned to Jacob. For a moment all the hard roads between them seemed to stand there too. The muddy wagon crossing where they met, the biscuits without a name, the Bellamy porch, the North Road, the Carter kitchen, Willow Creek, the burning shack, every fear, every silence, every small kindness that had carried them to this place. Jacob removed the mended gloves and held them out. "They are worse than when you gave them to me," he said. The wool was stained with smoke and work. One thumb had pulled open again. Eliza took them gently, then shook her head. "No," she said, "they are better." He looked at her, not understanding. They did what they were meant to do. The sun lowered behind the ridge. A soft wind crossed the yard, moving her loosened hair against her cheek. Jacob wanted to say many things, but the right ones came simple. "I came back when the creek broke," he said. Eliza looked toward the creek beyond the lower pasture. Ice still clung to its edges, but water ran clear through the middle, catching the last light. "Yes," she said, "and you brought more than yourself back." That spring, Jacob stayed at the Carter place until the worst of winter had passed and the herd stood strong enough to graze the lower slopes. Eli learned the north fence so well he could walk it in his mind. Noah began keeping a little notebook of cattle marks and feed counts, writing slow letters with his tongue caught between his teeth. Martha Carter leased a small timber right on her own terms, not to Dobbs, but to honest men under Judge Callahan's eye. The money did not make her rich, but it kept the ranch breathing. Silas offered Jacob summer work on the Bellamy South pasture, with fair pay and a chance to run a small herd under his own name by the next year. Jacob accepted. This time he did not answer before the sentence was finished. He looked at Eliza first. She nodded. Then he said yes. They were married the following October in the small white church at Coulter Bend. Martha Carter sat in the second pew with Eli and Noah beside her. Mrs. Hanley brought biscuits wrapped in cloth and cried into her handkerchief before the vows even began. Silas stood straight at the front with his wife, Clara, beside him, trying so hard not to look moved that everyone knew he was. Eliza wore a cream dress with blue stitching at the cuffs. Jacob wore a new coat bought with money he had earned, not borrowed. In his pocket, folded beneath his handkerchief, he carried the first note Eliza had ever left him. No man should ride on an empty stomach. And at the bottom of that same pocket lay the $11 he had never spent. Years later, when their children asked why he kept old money in a drawer beside a pair of smoke-stained gloves, Jacob would tell them the truth. "That was what I had when I asked for your mother," he would say, "and those gloves were what she gave me when she believed I could become more." Then Eliza would correct him from across the room. "No," she would say softly, "I gave them because I already knew." And every time, Jacob would look at her the same way he had looked at her in the Carter yard, like a poor man who had been handed the richest kind of trust and had spent his whole life trying to be worthy of it. If this story warmed your heart, let me know in the comments what you believe makes a good man: money, courage, kindness, or the promise he keeps when nobody is watching. And if you enjoy emotional Wild West stories where love and truth ride the same hard road, subscribe and stay close for the next one. The Carter Ridge stayed in the family. The Bellamy South pasture became Jacob's first honest start. Eliza Bellamy grew older, but never stopped telling people he had not given his daughter to a poor cowboy. He had given her to a good man. And on quiet evenings, when the Montana sun fell soft across the fences, Jacob and Eliza would stand together near the creek and listen to the water moving over stone, remembering the winter that had tested everything. The final truth was simple. A man's worth was never in what he carried to the porch. It was in what he was willing to carry after he walked away.